the Federal Reserve has far too much power. And if you study humans or history, when humans have too much power, they abuse it. Instead of blaming the human, the family, or the company, instead we need to build a system that doesn't even put us in that position in the first place.
That's a really good analogy from like a spiritual perspective of if you're a food addict or a drug addict or whatever, it's not the right approach to say, let me keep all these drugs in my house, let me keep all this junk food in my house, and I'm just gonna try to willpower myself not to eat it or take the drugs. It's like, you're going to fail. Get those things out of your house. And that's what we need to do as a country, right? Is like get all this corruption out of our house, because if we don't, it's just going to keep perpetuating itself.
A lot of people feel reliant on being somewhat involved in the political system, even though maybe they don't like it, because they feel like, well, if this person doesn't get into office, that's my only hope, right? Well, a complete alternative to that is like technologies like Bitcoin and actually like decentralized cryptocurrencies. They allow you to participate in a new form of money that, whether there's a Republican or a Democrat, you're not only going to be able to maintain your wealth, but it will actually skyrocket.
For me, it's about helping give the world those enlightened perspectives. And that's what we try to do on this show, is talk about these charged issues, whether it's politics or world corruption, from an enlightened perspective. Welcome back, beautiful awakening beings, to the Great Awakening podcast, where we document the light side of global news and document the unfolding story of humanity's Great Awakening. My name is Aaron Abke, and I'm joined by my good friend and powerful co-host, Mr. J-Griff. How you doing today, bro?
Doing amazing. We got a special episode today.
Indeed we do. Today we are only going to look at a couple of reaction clips from the last week or two, and spend most of the episode answering your questions from our previous episode. So stay tuned for that shortly. But first, why don't we just kick it off with some reaction clips? So what do you got for us today, Jeremy?
Cool. All right. So if you guys remember a few episodes ago, it's probably more like, might have been 3-4 months ago, we talked a little bit about and had a segment on Stripe integrating with cryptocurrency. Do you remember that, Aaron?
I sure
Talked
do.
a little bit about how they were going to be, I believe it was Solana. Do you remember which coins it was? It was like Solana, Polygon.
Bitcoin, right?
And there was one or two others, maybe USDC.
I think it was ETH too, wasn't it?
I don't remember. But there were a number of popular cryptocurrencies that they were going to be integrating and allowing payment services with. And I was kind of talking about the merging of Web 2.0 with Web 3.0, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a few days ago, we had Stripe acquired the stablecoin platform Bridge in a $1.1 billion deal. So I wanted to definitely revisit that and kind of update people on that who saw our initial clip when we were talking about this. So it says this is Stripe's largest acquisition ever and the most valuable deal in the cryptocurrency industry so far. That's not to be understated. There hasn't really been any very large acquisitions. So super cool to see. It talks a little bit about the ROI for the Bridge employees and such, but that doesn't really matter. This is the part I kind of wanted to talk about. So it says the company brought back cryptocurrency payment functionality for businesses in the US earlier this month, supporting USDC transactions on multiple blockchain networks, including Ethereum, Solana, and Polygon.
We were correct.
Yeah, so those were the coins we were looking for. And then it also mentions the acquisition follows Stripe's partnership with Coinbase in June a few months ago, where Stripe integrated the base layer 2 network into its crypto payment offering and established itself as a payment method within Coinbase wallet. So they're out here absolutely making moves. And
Smart of them, dude.
Yeah. And as far as like merchant processors, like you have Square, Stripe, PayPal, these types, Stripe is by far the most innovative. And so what this is going to do is kind of unlock that aspect of game theory, which we've talked about before, where everyone else kind of has to now scramble to make moves, right? Because for every month that Stripe has this capability and their competitors don't, they're just going to siphon their customers away from them, right? So it's kind of that's one of the cool things about capitalism, where the consumers end up benefiting because the companies have to compete with one another, and that ends up driving costs down, that ends up driving innovation and things of this nature. So very exciting day and time in general for any cryptocurrency investors. And for those of you who have been in crypto or who maybe have just recently entered after educating yourself a little bit further from our show or wherever you're at with it, it's definitely exciting because, you know, there's been this notion, and I think I brought this up before on the show, Aaron, but there's been this notion up until now, really, that, you know, you buy crypto, you're holding it, and then you're basically waiting for this day in which you're going to sell it to convert it back to cash. But it's like the dollar is not something you necessarily want to be holding long term. So there's kind of like this required paradigm shift where it's like we're quickly entering a world where you don't necessarily need to cash out and go back to cash. And I think that's, like I said, it's a paradigm shift. It's not second nature to just understand that, right? Especially even for seasoned crypto investors, like I see it every day, most are treating it as if it's a stock or anything else, where it's like, I'm going to take profit and then I'm going to cash out and then it's going to move it to my bank. And it's like, the rules are different in a fourth turning. Like this is, you know, I haven't been screaming from the rooftops like once in a generation opportunity for nothing. So it's just a little bit different. But even for someone like myself, who's, you know, prepared for this for years, it's still like kind of surreal to see stuff like this, where it's like, wait, like, really? I really don't have to cash out. Like it's finally here.
Yeah, man. We've been waiting.
So it's cool. So what that means is basically like, it's not that you never take profits, right? Because you don't need to hold certain coins, or you may not want to hold certain coins through bull and bear cycles. But what it does mean is like, instead of taking profits from, let's say like Solana and converting it into USDC, which is a stable coin that's pegged 1-to-1 to the dollar, it's just a digital version of that. But then there's that extra step of, okay, from that, selling it and cashing it out to my bank, where it actually is dollars, right? So that's called off-ramping. That extra step is no longer going to be required.
Right.
And it's going to be very popular in the next like 12 months. We're going to see a lot of this. I talked about X Portal. Do you remember that a while ago? There was that app that was offering that. But the issue is they haven't rolled it out yet for the United States because of our freaking regulation that stifles innovation. So hopefully with
SEC,
if we got a Trump victory, I expect that to be available to us very soon. But regardless, as far as alternative options, you know, when you have Stripe doing things like this, I mean, me and you both run businesses with like recurring revenue and stuff like that, right? So people are usually using some sort of checkout link, and I don't know what processor you use, but we actually do use Stripe. Yeah, so exactly. So imagine like someone wants to join 4DU, and instead of having to, and this happens to us, I don't know if you ever have this happen, but sometimes people have to actually schedule follow-up calls with my team before joining because they have to go sell Bitcoin or something to then use it to join the community. And it's like, that's an unnecessary extra step. They should just be able to use the crypto of their choice to complete the checkout, and then Stripe handles that for me and converts it into what we desire. Like, because sometimes people are like, will you accept this? Will you accept this? And it's like, I've never even heard of this coin. I'm not going to accept this random coin.
Will you accept poop coin?
Yeah, exactly.
OUC?
So like this will, and we talked about that before, like that's kind of what Stripe's going to be doing. They'll be the middleman in between, and it will automatically convert to USD, and they won't have to have that extra step. So it's just going to be that next level of convenience, that next reason to not need to off ramp, and like just an all around paradigm shift for people to realize like, oh, this isn't just like something you can like buy and flip for like profit. This is like actually a currency. And up until now, I don't think people actually view it that way. Even people that say they're like all about it, they're really just here for a, you know, to flip. Meaning buy at 10, sell at 20. Like that's what most people are doing in crypto. But in reality, like what happens when we quickly enter a world where the costs of cashing out are greater than the costs of not? And I think, you know, that's where we're quickly headed. So exciting stuff.
Yeah. And then you can just use your Bitcoin or whatever to just buy something directly as an exchange of value rather than going through all the middlemen. It's huge, dude. I guess what I'm thinking right now is there's probably a lot of people watching who maybe they don't fully grasp the implications of cryptocurrency on the Great Awakening of our planet and all of, you know, how that correlates. So in a few words, like how would you explain to somebody who maybe doesn't understand the big picture yet of why is this a really good thing for the Great Awakening, you know?
The top two value propositions is decentralization and a hedge against tyranny. So I'll quickly go into those two. So with our current model of currency, we have a centralized model. So the Federal Reserve has far too much power. And if you study humans or history or really any of these types of realms, you will quickly see that when humans have too much power, they abuse it. And so instead of blaming the human or, you know, the family or the company, it's just human nature. So instead, we need to build a system that doesn't even put us in that position in the first place. And so that's the decentralization aspect of cryptocurrency. No one owns it. It's not a publicly traded company. It doesn't have a CEO. So there's not what you call counterparty risk. And that's a really big deal because even like stocks in the stock market, like ultimately a lot of what you're betting on is the jockey, right? So like you're betting on that CEO and that CEO can 10x the company or drive it into the ground. And there's just a lot of human risk. Whereas with cryptocurrency, you're not dealing with human risk. This is code and it can't be altered. So at least a good cryptocurrency's code can't be altered. Some, I'm sure, a lot of coins that try to act like the legit coins, I believe can be altered, but I digress. And then the other piece, a hedge against tyranny, is really important as well, because as I'm sure most of our viewers have noticed, your buying power is getting sucked out of your pockets very quickly.
Sucked into the void.
Yeah, it's just getting siphoned year over year. And so, and then we also have a lot of political issues where like a lot of people feel reliant on being somewhat involved in the political system, even though maybe they don't like it because they feel like, well, if this person doesn't get into office, that's my only hope, right? Well, a complete alternative to that is like not putting ourselves in that position in the first place.
Exactly.
And so technologies like Bitcoin and actually like decentralized cryptocurrencies, they allow you to store your wealth and use and participate in a new form of money that whether there's a Republican or a Democrat, whether they print the dollar to the ground or not, you're not only going to be able to maintain your wealth, but it will actually skyrocket the more that they print versus the way that things have been thus far. The way that most people earn a living is through a job, and the more that they print, the less that earned income actually helps them, and everything else gets more expensive, and the dollars that are sitting in their bank account don't go as far. It's not like they take dollars out of your bank account. You still have $10,000 if you had $10,000 before. It's just that when you go to buy a car, it's not $30,000 anymore. It's 65, and your financing rate isn't 4.5% anymore. It's 9. And so it's just a sleight of hand. Whereas if you had $10,000 in Bitcoin before, and then you look at $10,000 in Bitcoin now, the amount of Bitcoin, right? Let's say you had like 0.2 Bitcoin or whatever, that amount didn't change, but whereas it may have been worth $10,000 before, it might be worth $30,000 before. So you have the opposite effect of inflation. And so I would just refer to it as a hedge against tyranny, because a lot of people have come to accept inflation in our capitalistic system, but it's actually just a byproduct largely of government spending. We've been conned that it's like a side effect of capitalism, but it's really not. If we didn't have the Federal Reserve and we didn't have the governmental spending model that we have, where they just blow cash, and largely not even on our nation. That's the majority of our inflation, just FYI. Like, it doesn't have to exist. A lot of other nations, they actually have deflation issues. I've talked about that before. Like Japan, China, other nations, they actually have issues. They have to try to inflate their currency because it struggles so bad, it deflates. So ours is quite the opposite. But I do believe that's because we're the world's reserve currency and have kind of abused that for a bit too long.
Yeah, to put it mildly. Yeah, the way I see it is, I love your example of, we can't expect humans to overcome their egoic nature right now, where we are collectively. If you give like 95 or more % of people like a lot of power, they're going to abuse it. It's just the ego's nature. So we can't expect the planet to heal and awaken by just becoming collectively morally virtuous all at once. It's probably not going to happen, right? At least not for a long time. So a better way to go about helping spur the awakening along is get rid of the ability to have corruption, so that we actually have to operate in a fair society. That's a really good analogy from like a spiritual perspective of, if you're a food addict or a drug addict or whatever, it's not the right approach to say, let me keep all these drugs in my house, let me keep all this junk food in my house, and I'm just going to try to willpower myself not to eat it or take the drugs. It's like, you're going to fail over and over again. That's not the right strategy. Get those things out of your house. And that's what we need to do as a country, right? Is like, get all this corruption out of our house, because if we don't, it's just going to keep perpetuating itself. There will always be greedy, power-hungry people who have no problem harming others to gain power for themselves. We can't expect those types of people to stop appearing on our planet, because we've got a ways to go before that's our reality. So let's de-incentivize corruption as much as we possibly can. And when I look at our country here in America, and if I had to point my finger at like, what's the most obvious forward-facing corruption? If you could pick only one issue, what is it? Personally, I would probably choose the money in politics issue, because to me, there's nothing more egregiously, morally wrong about allowing politicians to be bought and paid for by big mega corporations. What could be a greater violation of our rights as Americans, that we elect these, we vote for senators, congressmen, presidents, whoever, governors, and we're voting for them because we're like, hey, I believe you're going to represent me the best. And so I vote for you. And then as soon as you get in office, you get paid millions of dollars by mega pharmacy companies and stuff. And you're just like, all right, pharmacy companies, what do you want me to do? What policies do you want? You guys paid me 10 mil, whatever you want, I'll do it. And we're all like, but I voted for you for me. Like, well, but you didn't give me $10 million. It's like, this isn't how the system was supposed to work, the way our founding fathers, created it. So if we did anything to help clear up corruption in our country the fastest, the first move I would make is, let's make it illegal for anyone holding public office to take any money from any corporations or institutions, because it's bribery, right? That's on its face. That's exactly what it is. Corporations bribe politicians to insert the policies they want. And so, of course, we have a runaway capitalist society, because it doesn't mean capitalism is inherently a bad model or something. I think it's probably the best model we have available, because it imitates natural law, right? You look at the nature or the animal kingdom, and it's capitalism, right? It's the strongest survive, the strongest rise to the top. But everybody finds their place in the natural world when it's that competition model. So if we want to mimic natural law, capitalism is probably the best way to go. But we can't have a capitalist society where there's all of these loopholes for corruption and essentially communism to sneak its way in through money laundering and bribing. So it's like money is really the source of all corruption in this country and really around the world. So if you can stop the flow of money going to corrupt means or from corrupt sources, you can clear up a lot of the problems, right? And the big problem is, if you guys don't know this, that you're listening, here's some breaking news for you. Our currency is fake. We don't really have money. Our currency isn't backed by anything. You know, it's like monopoly money that the Fed prints and says, we say it has value. You get no say in it. Use our monopoly money. And so as Jeremy was saying, inflation just increases every year and our buying power goes down. So how does humanity get out of this trap of the weaponization of money or fake money against us? Well, something like cryptocurrency is a incredibly powerful solution to that because of all the reasons Jeremy just gave. It's decentralized, it can't be printed and inflated. You really can't use it in the same ways for collusion like you can with our fiat currency. So yeah, anytime I see a cryptocurrency breaking news like this kind of adoption from Stripe, I get really excited because I know it's a very good thing that cryptocurrency is getting adopted because it gives us more power, the people more power to use our money the way we want to. But with all of the backgrounds and the way it works with the economy and the different currencies, like I'll read an article and be like, I know this is good news, but I don't really understand what this article is really saying. So let me send this to Jeremy and see what he has to say. And then you'll usually explain like the full implications of it. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. So, thank you for breaking that down. But to the viewers of this show right now, Jeremy has not been shy about encouraging you to get involved in cryptocurrency because this really is a once in a lifetime opportunity for wealth generation. And you don't even have to have tons and tons of money to make a great profit from cryptocurrency and the way that these cycles every couple of years run. It's like just invest whatever you can invest now, and you can really make a good return on that. And then the next cycle, you can do it again, and you can sort of build like that if you're not working with a lot of liquid capital. But yeah, just for the sake of us all becoming financially independent, not outsourcing our power anymore to institutions, we have to be financially independent. And they've rigged the game, like you said, with their game theory, that they control the fiat, the fake money printing, and they want us to use that fake money so they can control it. And so we're going to start using cryptocurrency more and more as time goes by. And it's going to be interesting to see how the negative polarity pivots, according to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're definitely racing to cement themselves in whatever ways they can to control this new wave, because they weren't expecting it to get this big and reach terminal velocity. And so
yeah,
to me, that's what the ETFs are and a lot of these things, right? So just if they can convince as many, there's 300-ish million Americans, if they can convince, 2/3 or more, which I think is very conservative because the amount of people that invest into 401ks or IRAs is almost everyone who works a job.
Yeah.
So that's the model. And so if they can convince them to buy the fake Bitcoin, right, just buy the ETFs, then that's the booby trap with the new system.
Yeah.
Is right. So maybe that's a little confusing because our audience might be like, but Jeremy, you're saying how bullish this was. You're always excited about ETF news. Yeah, that's because ETF equals price go up.
Right. I wouldn't want to be invested in the ETF.
Yes.
But
right.
It helps what I'm invested in, right?
Yeah. And, maybe if it's a quick flip, whatever, like I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever to ever buy it, but the typical model of work a job, invest monthly in your 401k, and now you have the option to invest in Bitcoin. I mean, I think that's great for people that, that's where they're at. But if you're willing to actually do your due diligence and stuff like that, you would want to figure out the difference between actually owning your coins and storing them off any sort of brokerage and fully cold storage, what we would call it.
Yeah.
And, having this thing showing up in your brokerage that mimics the price of Bitcoin, but is actually far from true cryptocurrency ownership. Those are different things. So yeah, that's their main approach right now. But like, regardless, I think they acknowledge and are very well aware, especially the government and the politicians, that like, they don't fully know what to do with this right now. They don't know what to do with it yet. And I saw an interesting little clip the other day from Obama, which I'm not going to play or anything like that. It was just a one-liner, but he was basically saying, now that Bitcoin is popular, people basically have a Swiss bank account in their pocket. And I thought that was a very good way to explain that. And if that's
he
coming
said
from
the quiet part out loud, bro.
Exactly. So like, before, jurisdiction used to be like a physical thing, right? Like, it used to be longitudinal and latitudinal, and you had to go overseas to essentially shelter money. And with this, what you guys need to understand at a simple level is just that jurisdiction is now what we would call, there's now a gray area. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just go into the cyber world and the blockchain, and there are essentially, that's massively threatening to them, because you have a Swiss bank account in your pocket.
They can't control your money anymore.
They're relying on you to report that and to play by their rules, but they don't own the thing. Think about that. They own our currency. So yeah, they make the rules. They don't own this thing. Now, I know there's going to be the reply guys in the comments that the CIA
bro. CIA, bro.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm curious, before we move on, what is your preferred cold storage method or product?
Yeah, we had a question about that. So we like to, just base for pretty much everyone listening would be just the Ledger Nano. There's the X and the S, whatever you like.
Bro.
What?
I've had the biggest problems with Ledger. With the Nano X. Yeah, I've bought 3 of them. I have them all right here, actually, because I'll buy a new one.
Why? What happens?
Two of them. I'll buy one. I put all my coins on it, and then when I load it onto my computer, it says like error, broken, or whatever.
Wait,
I
really?
Can't get it to fix. So I call Ledger. I'm like, hey, and they're like, we'll send you a new one. They send me a new one. I plug it in. Within 2 minutes, it goes error, broken, not working. I'm like, so I buy a third one. So I've bought 3 of these things now.
No way.
I got to buy a 4th one because all 3 I've gotten have broken. But maybe you've had better luck than I have with Ledger.
Well, not only that, I mean, we've had a few hundred students on ramp, and not one has ever shared that that's happened.
I just have weird karma with technology, bro.
It could be your computer. Like,
I've tried it on my MacBook and iMac.
Wow, interesting.
I just have some bad karma from a past life, bro. I'm here to heal it. It's why I incarnated.
Yeah. But there's other options. There's Trezor.
I use Trezor too. I like
I've never used that one, but seems to be widely accepted.
Yeah.
And then if you're looking for like higher security, just like a little bit of a bougier one that we recommend to our students in our community, at least like if you're just starting out, unnecessary. But if you're multiple 6 figures and above, usually it makes sense to start to invest more into privacy and security in terms of your wallet choices and stuff. And there's been 1 or 2 things over the years that Ledger has done that are, I wouldn't say horrible, but just a little bit questionable.
Yeah.
Where it's like, would I want to have millions on there? I don't know. So it's called the Grid Lattice Plus. And that's what we have kind of our higher net worth students use. And that's what I use as well. But I do use Ledgers. I have different ones. But
maybe I'll have better karma with the Grid.
I'm glad you asked that because, once again, like if you're new to this stuff, just want to highlight that like if you look up Bitcoin on Robinhood or any sort of
Coinbase.
brokerage and you buy some, you don't own Bitcoin. I'm just letting you know. You own a derivative that tracks Bitcoin. And here's the difference. If Robinhood goes under, or if your shit gets seized and you're like a fugitive or something, right? Then that's theirs. It's gone. If you actually own Bitcoin, can you hold up your ledger again, Aaron?
Yeah.
Then you have it in your pocket. You can shove it up your ass. You can swallow it.
If you're going through airport security, that's the best way.
It can be a suppository.
Like, bro, no one cares if you have a cold. You don't need to put it up your ass, dude.
Yeah. So my
just
point
in case,
is like
just in
that,
case.
that thing is with you. So let's say that right now Aaron's like, I'm going to Africa and he has $10 million on that ledger. Well, if you have $10 million in what says it's Bitcoin on like Robinhood or on one of these brokerages or even on Coinbase or any of these ones, on Coinbase, that is real Bitcoin, right? On Robinhood, not. On Coinbase, yes. But if it sits on Coinbase, that's not yours. You have to take it off. And that's the big difference between like stocks, these other instruments that we're used to, and then this new instrument. It's like, that's why the government is terrified of it and they don't know what to do with it, because it's literally digital gold. Like the same way that you have precious metals and you store them in a vault, you don't, pretty much anyone who's into metals knows if you buy this thing on the screen that represents the metal, you don't actually own metals. You own a derivative that's hopefully tracking metals, but you don't own metals unless they're in your hand and in your vault.
Yeah.
Well, crypto is the same way. It's just a digital version of that. So hopefully that, pieces some things together for people.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for that breakdown, dude. All right, man. So the big news in the last few weeks was obviously Hurricane Helene.
Yep.
And then Hurricane Milton, I think, was the week later.
Yeah, the back-to-back.
Yeah, back-to-back Cat
Sus.
5s.
Sus.
A little sus. So I wanted to get into that and just the spiritual implications of the way we saw not only our government handle these disasters, but the collective response. There's a lot of stuff circulating around weather modification we're going to look at, and just having this conversation that it's a tough conversation. Like, can our government manipulate the weather and deceive us with climate change? It's like kind of an uncomfortable topic for people, because if it's true, that'd be like really bad news for humanity, right? And so most people don't want to believe that they have that kind of power. But that's called spiritual bypassing, right? When you're aware of a distortion and you're like, I don't want to acknowledge that, and you suppress it, avoid it. It's called spiritual bypassing. And spiritual bypassing is my theme of the day for this episode with both of the clips I'm going to share, because this is what's really plaguing America more than anything, is our bypassing of our problems. And so this Hurricane Helene, to me, there's a lot of things about it that highlighted this point. So first, we're going to look at these two clips.
What's going on, guys? We want to take a really quick break from the show to let you know that if you appreciate and support what we're doing with this show and what we're doing with the Great Awakening mission, please consider subscribing to our Rumble channel, as YouTube has now deleted 2 full episodes of ours without warning or explanation.
And we're not sure how much longer our content will be allowed on YouTube. And we want to ensure that this content stays on the internet. And this is why we've moved our whole channel now over to Rumble, which you can find the link for that in the description below. With that being said, let's get back to the show. Did you see this, Jeremy?
No, I didn't.
So this dude saddled up his horses with a ton of food and gear for the victims of the hurricane and just marched on over to North Carolina, bro. Outdoor
serious?
style.
Damn.
Pretty epic.
Did he
That's a
say
lot of
how
horses.
long of a trip that was?
Nope, not in this clip anyway. So I thought that was cool, right? To see a human-to-human response rather than just crying, "Big Daddy Government, come save us."
Right.
It's like, we can save us. We're all in this together. We got each other's backs. There was a lot of awakening to that idea that I saw all over social media of like, we don't need the government to help us. Yeah, we're watching them. What was it? Sent like 150 million or 147 million to, I believe, Ukraine, like 2 days after the hurricane. Just like this huge slap in the face to everyone in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And people were just shaking their heads, understandably so. Like, how could our government abandon us like this? We saw it with Lahaina as well. And so people are just getting sick of it. And it's like, the solution isn't to cry hard enough that big daddy government comes and saves us. It's to find our own ways to save each other and save ourselves. That's what, the collective consciousness in not just America, but everywhere in the world is trying to learn. And it's, there's this gradual awakening, right? That at this point, I would say is really not so gradual. It's pretty much everywhere that people are waking up to the fact that we have a sort of corrupt political class who has hijacked our government and is performing essentially money laundering through all kinds of different forms, proxy wars overseas, open borders, the pharmacy industry, printing fake money, many other ways we can mention, right? It's like land pirates have hijacked our government and they're pretending to be our government officials so that they can keep their ruse going. But people are waking up to like, these aren't real leaders. These aren't really the people we've elected. And so instead of, playing victim anymore of like, why is this happening to us? How do these evil people get into power? It's so unfair. We just can't stop them. Boo-hoo. Instead of doing that, it's like, no, we have to take responsibility, right? At what point do we take responsibility for the position that our country's in, right? Politically and in the government. When do we say, look, we allowed this to happen? We're not victims. We, the people, allowed this corruption to continue right before our eyes from the 1920s forward, right? Or, 1913, really. We've allowed all these shenanigans to go on unchecked. We've allowed these corrupt politicians to infiltrate our country while we've turned a blind eye to it. We've seen this kind of corruption for decades in our country. This isn't anything new. We've known our government is very corrupt for a long time. I mean, most people knew that they assassinated JFK back in the 60s. It's 80 years ago now. But it's an inconvenient reality, right? That most people don't want to acknowledge. And that's the spiritual bypassing component is like, yes, nobody wants this to be true. Nobody would want to make this up if it wasn't true. It's an inconvenient fact, but that's how all healing is, right? Nobody wants to admit they have a big blockage in the area of self-worth or whatever, but you have to look at those blockages in yourself if you're going to heal them. And so Americans have kind of done this, right? Is continually bypassing the obvious corruption for many decades now. And so of course it has to reach a tipping point where we're now forced to reckon with it, right? We don't have the luxury anymore of ignoring the corruption of our government, because if we don't do something about it, we're going to end up with a pretty terrible communist totalitarian world that we're going to then leave to our children and say, sorry guys, we couldn't do anything about it ourselves or didn't want to. So why don't you guys hopefully take care of this problem? Good luck. And we leave our children a planet that is far worse off than ours was. I don't know about you, but I don't want to do that. And I think most people listening don't want to do that. So we have to get involved in some way in order to fix this mess. And to me, that's just the perfect catalyst for unity. That's what the creator is really doing by allowing this corruption to get exposed. It's kind of shocking, isn't it? Especially because the Kamala Harris administration is running for president right now, and she's currently the sitting vice president, that there would be a disastrous hurricane on American soil, and they wouldn't. I don't know exactly what aid they sent. I just saw a video interview today of a panel of people from North Carolina saying, we haven't been sent our $750. No one I know has been able to qualify for it. Everybody that applies for it and says, hey, my home got destroyed, I lost everything, can I, apply for this handout? And they're getting denied. So it's like they sort of just offered it as lip service. Like, look, we're going to help. We're going to give everybody $750. You lost your house, your car, your everything, but you could go buy an iPhone 8.
It's insanely disrespectful.
It's super disrespectful, but it's a good thing because we need people to wake up to this kind of corruption. And it was just kind of shocking to me that they would pull a stunt like that while she's running for president, and then 2 days later send more hundreds of millions of dollars to another country overseas. and it woke people up. People got angry, and that, even though that's not the highest frequency we can come from, collective anger can spark awakening and unity as well.
Yeah.
God works through that as well. So it's like we the people have to unite first. We can't expect them to do it on our behalf. It's our first order of business before any real change can be created. We got to take responsibility for what we've allowed to happen. We're not victims. We have to begin coming together and respecting each other, helping, loving each other, despite our differences. And then the second thing we have to do, I think, after we unite, is become truly self-sufficient and stop outsourcing everything to governments and corporations, as we kind of just touched on with the crypto conversation, because we collectively have to stop trading our freedoms for conveniences. We have to build new systems, right? We, the people, have to allow each other to be our caretakers. And that's the only way forward into the new earth. We have to become self-responsible, a self-responsible civilization, and look out for one another. This is basic herd animal intelligence, right? Even herd animals in the wild understand this law and they follow it obediently, that there's power in unity. Look at wolf packs or lion prides. Humans are also a herd animal. And although we've ceased to be herd animals in at least, recent years in the technology era of civilization, we still are fundamentally herd animals in that we need each other, right? If every human disappeared off the earth, Jeremy, and I was the only one left, I probably wouldn't live very long. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I need other people to live. I need all the systems of humanity depend on everybody else. So it's like humans are the only herd animal on this planet that seems to not understand the importance and the power of unity and treating others how we want to be treated, having each other's backs. There's great power in that. And so long as you're here to really help others, you gain the protection of the whole group. And then likewise, if you harm others, you'll be kicked out of the group. So sort of like decentralization incentivizes fairness, unity amongst groups incentivizes fairness, because when you step out of line, you lose that group protection and support. So it kind of creates its own perfect justice system of like the onus is on you. It's to your best benefit to be a part of this unity and be of service to others, because then everyone else is going to be of service to you. This is what humanity is learning through things like these hurricanes, when we've seen this massive effort, this kind of grassroots effort, right? From people like these people we just watched on horseback, people on helicopters going in. We heard those stories of, Good Samaritan helicopter pilots going in there to rescue people. And then I think it was the local police came in and said, if you save one more person, we'll arrest you. Did you see that video?
No.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, man. It's a father and a son he's a helicopter pilot. He went in, he was saving people. And it was really kind of sad because there was this elderly couple stuck in their home. They ran out of food. They were a day or two away from death. And he was able to rescue the wife and took her to safety. And when he landed, the police were there and they were like, sirens on, and they took him aside and they're like, you're not allowed to save people here. This is our jurisdiction to save people. And he's like, but you guys aren't, and people are dying. So like, I want to help. And they're like, we'll throw you in jail if you do that, if you fly this helicopter up there again. So we had to look at this poor woman, elderly woman, and say, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I can't go save your husband, or I go to jail and I have to pay all these fines. And so her husband didn't get rescued by him. And there's all these stories of like people trying to help out and the corrupt institutions still trying to get in the way. But it's like, what a great step, right? You see the way that people in times of crisis, and we saw this in 9/11, and anytime there's a big crisis, that's what always stokes the flames of unity in our country, in the hearts of our citizens. And it's like unfortunate that we need to have these kinds of mega disasters to finally unite. But it's like, whatever it takes at the end of the day, I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And it's easy to react from that kind of first order response of anger or whatever it is. But I think one of our main intentions with this show that we try to consistently come back to is like the deeper implications. And when everything's rainbows and butterflies, it's not really much of a catalyst for spiritual evolution. Right. So as much as it can seem like that's a negative topic, I agree with you. I think it's incredibly positive, and I think that everything is actually quite positive.
Yeah. And the last bit on this I want to touch on is the weather modification components of this conversation, because that was, again, a big talking point in the collective. And I'm going to play this short from the PBD podcast where he did a whole segment on exposing.
Did you see Grant Cardone as well?
I didn't. No, I didn't see that one.
He was saying, I've lived in Florida for whatever, my whole life, 25 years, something like that. And he's like, I've never seen a hurricane like come on this quick and move in this direction, blah, blah, blah. Like basically insinuating that it was engineered.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of prominent people have been saying that.
Yeah.
And there's actually a clip I'll play. Did you see any of the clips of like the airplane radar videos of these planes that were flying right in front of the hurricane's path and doing these weird zigzag patterns in front of it and then dipping out of the way? You didn't see this?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna show you. But let's play this clip from PBD first.
You ready for this? By the way, just brace for impact, because you're going to say there's no way this is true. It's called Operation, I believe, Cyrus. On the afternoon of October 13, 1947, an Air Force B-17 aircraft penetrated a hurricane 415 miles away east of Jacksonville and dumped several pounds of crushed dry ice into the storm just to see what would happen. This was the first attempt to modify a tropical cyclone by seeding it with freezing nuclei. Found the hurricane center nearly 100 miles west of where they expected it to be. To their astonishment, the hurricane had made a 135-degree left turn. On top of that, it was strengthening. By the afternoon of the 15th, Hurricane King struck Savannah, Georgia. One person died in the storm surge. $2 million in damages was done in Georgia and South Carolina. The public was outraged that the scientists had caused the storm to swerve into Georgia, and threats of lawsuits were thrown around. GE's case was not helped when the head of its laboratories, Dr. Irving Langmuir, issued a statement that he was 99% sure the storm had changed course due to what? Seeding. You ready for this? By the way, just brace for impact.
Created Hurricane Helene. What I am saying is that the government has been manipulating the weather since 1947. What first caught my attention with Helene was the shift in the storm's projected path. One day it looked like it would hit my town. The next day it had shifted east. I then noticed an odd flight path of NOAA 42, the aircraft being flown, a Lockheed Martin Orion P-3. This prompted me to look at previous uses for the P-3, where I discovered that they were used in the 1960s to manipulate Hurricane Camille in a, quote, weather.
Wow.
Now I know this sounds out there, but as we begin to see more and more the terrible things our government has done in the past, is it really so far-fetched? Here are the projections from the 23rd of September. A large spread traveling the Alabama-Georgia line and ending up in Illinois. On the 24th, projections shift slightly east, and the storm is projected to finish in Indiana. On the morning of the 25th, the path shifts back west and shows to be finishing in western Kentucky. That evening, a P-3 conducts a 6-hour operation inside the developing storm.
Wow.
The next morning, on the 26th, the path shows to have shifted slightly east again, now finishing in northwestern Tennessee. The evening of the 26th, the same P-3 conducts operations throughout Hurricane Helene as it makes landfall, and the storm's actual path.
It's a strange flight pattern.
Oh my God.
What would the government's motivations possibly be to modify a storm? That I don't know. But I do believe that if we can maintain our republic long enough, time will eventually tell.
Actually, I'm going to show you what their motive was right now. This was a clip that came out about after the hurricane a few weeks ago. Did you know that BlackRock just signed a $90 million contract for lithium in the exact town that was hardest hit by the hurricane? So again, we have a repeat here of Lahaina, don't we?
Yeah.
Who was invested in Lahaina? Was it a BlackRock or Vanguard type of thing?
I don't remember who.
It's been too long now, but it was one of those, it was like an investment institution like that or something, but they had drawn up plans to turn it into a smart city and they had all these investors in it. And then, you know, the people of Lahaina were protesting vehemently of, no, we do not want a smart city here. We don't want this to come here. And they're like, oh, so sorry. Your entire town just got destroyed by a laser from the sky. Don't worry. We'll step in and take over. So we're seeing, I think what we're seeing with Helene and the manipulation of the direction of Helene which, the PBD podcast just showed these articles from the 60s where they did this with just using dry ice. They were able to completely change their trajectory, a full left turn, which we saw, and it increased in strength. The one thing that clip didn't show was that it was another clip I saw that showed those same P3 planes doing all these weird flight patterns right in front of the storm and then dipping out of the way right as the storm comes through. And 3 or 4 of them happened, and they showed like each day how the hurricane category increased right after the hurricane passed the zone that the plane had done all those flight pattern circles in. And so it went from a 2 to a 3 to a 4 to a 5. And a bunch of my friends, most notably Alex Zek, began a prayer movement. I was going to be on the call actually on a couple weeks ago, but I had another appointment that night. But they did a group prayer for the hurricane to lose strength on its way. And it dropped from, and I don't know if this was Milton. I think it was Milton, not Helene. Milton dropped from a 5 to a 4 to a 3 within like less than 24 hours. And so, there's some evidence of the power of prayer. But anyway, let's look at what this news report says about the lithium mines in North Carolina that got hit.
Really dependent on one mineral called high purity quartz, and virtually the entire global supply of that quartz comes from one tiny town called Spruce Pine, North Carolina.
Whoa, I didn't catch that, bro. She just said almost the entire supply of lithium in the world? Holy cow, bro.
Monopoly.
That's called a monopoly, my friends. And that's what the power-hungry tyrants look for, if you weren't aware of that.
Now, Spruce Pine saw 2 feet of rainfall from Hurricane Helene, and now nearly a week later, city officials tell me that there's still no water, power, or cell service. The infrastructure is completely disrupted to the point that roads and railways are so torn up that in some areas in the western part of the state, mules are being used to transport materials in and out. So the 2 companies that operate the quartz mines there, that's Stablecoin and Quartz Corp, they tell us their work has been shut down since Thursday, and Quartz Corp adds that they have no visibility as to when operations can restart. So the question becomes not just whether the mines themselves have been damaged, but also whether it's possible to get the quartz out. Disruptions would impact not only the $5 billion quartz market, but the $600 billion semiconductor market that depends on it. And that quartz is also used in solar panels, fiber optic cables, and some light bulbs, which could all see some issues as well.
Okay, so we get the point. There's a lot at stake in this town, in these lithium mines, financially speaking, that money-hungry people would want. So it's like, you don't have to look too far to connect some dots of why people would be incentivized to do this. But not only do we know that there's clearly enormous incentive to do this, because of all the money involved, but we now know that there's definitely the technology to do it. Going back to the 60s, when we had a weather war with Cuba that I wasn't aware of until this week. I don't know about you, Jeremy.
No.
And then I'm going to show these 2. Can you see my screen here with the 2 articles?
Yeah, you're bringing the heat, Aaron.
I'm bringing the heat, bro. Weather Modification and S517, the Weather Modification Research and Technology Transfer Authorization of 2005. For decades, the federal government has dedicated significant resources to weather modification research. Uh-oh.
Oh, man.
And state local governments continue to spend millions on both operational weather modification technologies and weather modification research. This is from, 15, almost 20 years ago now, this article. Mm-hmm. And then here's the second page of this article. Figure 3 illustrates how the sound waves are focused to guide a weather system so that the system makes a turn to the right. Figure 4 illustrates how the weather system may be turned to the left. Under certain conditions, a nation might find it advantageous to create a tornado or hurricane, for example. Creation of a strong storm system could deter an enemy attack. My thoughts on this, which I'm sure are similar to yours, is, okay, if we have all this evidence that our government knows how to use weather modification technology, then it's like, why do we have hurricanes at all hitting our country? Maybe the bigger crime here is not that they're manipulating hurricanes to become stronger and move in certain directions to attack certain places. That's obviously a crime. But maybe the bigger crime is that we have had the technology to stop hurricanes from devastating us for 80 years potentially and aren't using it for good. You know, I saw another video that I couldn't find the clip to play on the show for you guys, so I apologize, but it was an older woman from like Denmark, I believe, and she was saying that there hasn't been a major storm in their town in Denmark for like 100+ years, because they have these bell towers. And whenever the weather gets bad or they know there's an incoming storm of some kind, they start ringing the bell towers. And she said the sound waves just completely dissipate the storm. And even tornadoes, everything to do with like wind and rain and hurricane type weather. And that's one way, you know we can stop weather is actually through sound technology, potentially even bells. Like how easy would that be to just fix some bells around every city, like big bell towers? And when there's bad weather, like all the bell towers just start going off to scatter the storm energy and dissipate the storm. That's like a super easy way we have. But it's like, are we going to beg the government to make us bell towers to save us from storms? I don't think that's probably going to work, because they're probably the ones manipulating them, you know? So again, it's like we the people have to unite, learn about these technologies, and come up with our own solutions. If we know our government isn't going to protect us from hurricanes, we can do it. The universe has given us very simple technologies we can tap into, like sound. And then I think the other one was dry ice. You can actually use dry ice to move storms away from a certain direction pretty easily. So, you know, it's a aspect of our awakening that as we wake up to different forms of corruption and get angry and play the victim, and then eventually we get tired of playing the victim and watching the government not care that we're crying victim all the time, and they're just going to keep doing their psyops on us. Eventually we're like, all right, enough of this. Let's stop crying for their help. Let's just take care of ourselves. And that is a very important advancement in our collective awakening.
Absolutely. Yep, it's all happening for us, and it's going to be an interesting decade. We'll just say that. I have a hunch there's going to be more where that came from, and there's going to be the people that are thinking it's the end of times per usual, and then
right.
There's also going to be the people that recognize that this is somewhat of a cyclical cleansing and awakening, and potentially not the first and potentially not the last. And I think that's the camp that we're in.
I would agree. And then before we get into Q&A, I'll play one more short clip that I thought was important to comment on. This clip was mega viral about a week or two ago. And this is JD Vance on ABC News, I believe.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America?
I got to pause this and replay that, because the look on her face, man, when she delivers that question, that talking point, it looks like she's disappointed with that question, doesn't it?
She seems like just incredibly troubled.
Yeah, like she's trying to tote the party line and say what they want her to say, you know, pin him on the, you know, it's only a couple apartment complexes. And I think even this lady, you can sort of see the dissonance behind her eyes of like, this is a really terrible talking point, but it's what I'm told to say, so I have to say it.
Concerns. A handful of problems.
Look,
she's like, God. She looks like she just ate something really sour.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting, because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said, rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else.
So the bigger point there is like apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado were taken over by violent gangs from another country. Not even just violent gangs like the Bloods or the Crips. Like we're talking about Venezuelan gangs from another country. That's called a foreign invasion. And, you know, yeah, it's just a few apartment complex buildings, but it's like, you know, you can hear the same excuses in the ego mind where like, you know, somebody does some cocaine at a party and they really like it. They get hooked on it for a while. And then somebody offers them another drug, and then somebody offers them heroin, and they're like, it's just one shoot up. Like, who cares? You know, like this is the way ego will gaslight itself and bypass these obvious problems. Like if we have foreign gangs taking over apartment buildings, we've got a big systemic issue in our country. And a couple days ago, I saw that there was just 2 more apartment complexes in Texas now, also taken over by Venezuelan gangs. And so it got me thinking, just the initial like shock of that clip where she's like, but you said it's bad, but come on, it's only a couple apartment complexes, right? And he's just like, what are we doing here? Am I really arguing with you about this? And these are the moments where people go like, how do we get to this point? It's like, because it's the slow crawl towards degeneracy that we've kept continually bypassing these warning signs. And I mean, we as a collective, you and I and most people listening to this show have been crying from the hilltops about these problems, right? And saying, we got to do something about this. But not enough people have. And so this is a huge issue in America's collective consciousness right now in terms of like the open border, because it's another area that we've been bypassing for quite a while. In that, you know, the border is, I think right now that's the second most important voting issue in America, just slightly beneath the economy, most polls say. And so it's like, how do we address these kinds of political issues from an enlightened spiritual perspective? And I want to take a quick moment to actually address that question, because we get a lot of listeners on our show that will comment every so often, and it's not super often. It's definitely the exception, not the norm, but we do get some comments from people that'll say things like, you know, Aaron, I'm so disappointed in you discussing world events and politics. You're supposed to be a spiritual teacher. You're not supposed to talk about these things. Please stop talking about world issues and politics and just go back to talking about spiritual things. I'm unsubscribing, you know, and stuff like that.
Love those.
And what's that?
I love those for you.
Yeah, me too. And I understand what their sentiments are, but here's my perspective to anybody who feels this way. I am unapologetically passionate about helping the great awakening of humanity, about being of service to this planet. I am very aware of how deeply in trouble our planet is from an awakening perspective, that we've got some big, big problems on this planet. Child trafficking, debt enslavement, constant war and conflict. We have a lot of systemic issues to clean up, and I'm sorry, maybe other spiritual teachers can do this, but I personally just can't feel okay watching all of these issues unfold on our planet and keeping silent about them, when what I feel we should be doing is bringing light to them and discussing these issues from a spiritual perspective and say, what is the enlightened way to deal with an open border issue or money laundering or corruption in politics? I don't want to hide from the issues on our planet. I want to bring healing to them. And that means we have to talk about them. And I realize that makes some people uncomfortable, but I would encourage you to look at why it makes you uncomfortable and whether it's an attachment or a fear or resistance you're holding. Why do you find it uncomfortable to hear people talk about world issues? Because if we love the world, if we care about people, we should want to help these kind of issues, because they create a lot of suffering on our planet. And it just feels like something that I came here to do. And I don't feel like I need more explanation than that. But for me, it's about helping give the world those enlightened perspectives. Because if everybody looks at these kinds of issues with anger and resentment and rage, they just get worse, right? We don't create change by being angry and upset and blaming and pointing the finger. So we've got to have examples of a grounded, mindful, balanced way to handle these charged issues. And that's what we try to do on this show, is talk about these charged issues, whether it's politics or world corruption, from an enlightened perspective. And when it comes to the open border issue, the spiritual perspective I wanted to touch on just really quick is the martyrdom aspect of having open borders as a country. The strongest example of martyrdom, if you don't know what that term really means, the strongest example would be like somebody who wants to help a mentally insane person by allowing them to take out their anger and abuse upon them. You know, imagine how foolish that would be, right? If you had a friend who went to an insane asylum and was visiting a violent inmate, you know, in a straitjacket, and they're like, Jeremy, you know, this poor guy, he's just suffering, you know, he just wants to beat people and kill people. And I felt so bad for him that he was stuck in his poor straitjacket and he couldn't act out his feelings. So I made myself his target board and I let him take out his abuse on me to be of service to him. Everybody would say, my brother, that's not real service, right? Martyring yourself for another person isn't service, because true service is where everybody wins, right? It can't be a service if you lose in order for someone else to win, or if someone else loses for you to win, right? Service has to benefit everyone involved, or it's not real service. And by the way, that's one of the ways you can spot the negative polarity, is that they're always touting their virtue and how much they want to help everybody. But when you look at the actual effects of their decisions, they always leave a trail of suffering and devastation in their wake. So it's like they pretend to help people so they can get a bill passed or whatever the motive is, but the actual application never comes through because the negative polarity can't actually help people, or they would lose negative power. So it's like, if we want to serve to be best of service to others, we have to use wisdom, right? Because harming yourself can't be of benefit to somebody else in a spiritual perspective. And so you should always prefer others above yourself, or you're a bad person, is kind of the negative polarity's talking point to trick people into martyring, right? Give up your rights, give up your freedoms, hurt yourself to help others, because if you're a good person, you'll care more about others than yourself. And that's the false light of using your own light against you. It's like, Jeremy, you're a good person, right? You want to help people, right? You wouldn't want to harm people, right? Of course not. So give up all these rights that are harming these people. And if you want to look virtuous, if you have something to prove, you'll give in to that trick, right? So it's the weaponization of the positive polarity against itself. It's your own light used against you, right? You have light because you want to serve people. And, you know, this is definitely true for both sides of the political aisle. It obviously tends to be way more true on the left, because the left, at least right now, it used to be different, but the left right now really represents the feminine polarity, whereas the right represents more of the masculine polarity, in that the left is all about social justice and helping people and being fair and equitable and stuff and caring and all that, which is very good. But the right is all about laws, rules, following the rules, common sense. And so they clash, right? But on the left, because that's the side of the political aisle that people who really want to help others tend to gravitate towards in their gullibility, their light is easily used against them. And so it's good that you have the desire to be of service, but if you don't use wisdom in your service, you can actually do more harm than good. So it should be obvious that no, we can't just let everyone in the world come into our country with unrestricted access, because the reality of our world is that we're not living on an enlightened planet yet. There are many, many people with very bad intentions, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, crime, etc., who want to come into this country to unleash their crimes in our country, where they can make more money with their crimes. We have to have the wisdom to know that, right? If we have an open border, it's like a siren call to the people with the worst intentions. And that's the famous Trump clip, right? Where he's like, when Mexico sends their people, they're not sending their best people. They're sending drugs, rapists, murderers, etc. And there's actually a lot of truth to that, right? Because these gangs and these traffickers look at this as this lucrative opportunity to get into the most lucrative country in the world, where they can make a lot more money on these kind of crimes. And so what J.D. Vance was attempting to point out to this poor news anchor is a point that appears to be totally lost on her, which is that, hey, you can't help others by hurting yourself, right? You have to find a way that benefits both people involved, or it isn't real service. And so that's why I feel that the America First approach is the more spiritually enlightened approach, because this is a first principle of your own spiritual growth. If you don't first take care of yourself, you can't actually help anybody. If you're not healed, you can't heal others, right? You can't help heal others. You can only give to others what you've given to yourself. And so if we don't take care of our own problems first, we can't really help anyone else. And obviously sending 300 billion to Ukraine for a war isn't helping them anyways. But like, even if America was sending money to other countries to the tune of hundreds of millions to solve world hunger and all this good virtuous stuff, it would still be a bad decision if we're living in poverty and disease and drug epidemic addiction and all these problems we have. You know, we have to take care of our own problems first, and then we can support others. And this is spirituality 101, right? To spend all of our money as a country, and I want you to look at our country as a macrocosm of an individual, because all the same rules apply, as we've always been saying. To spend all of our money to help other countries of the world while we're starving, we're poor, we're riddled with disease, this is spiritual bypassing, and it's martyrdom. We are bypassing our own problems in order to showcase some kind of fake virtue to the world. Look how good we are. We help other countries, you know, while we're suffering and dying. We're always helping others at the cost of ourselves. And again, true service doesn't look like that. So a service where both sides win is the only kind of service we should be proponents of or tolerate from our leaders. And if we see these kinds of things like, what is it now, almost 4 years of open borders, 20 million some odd illegal immigrants are now in our country. And it was one of the bureaus, one of the 3-letter agencies, DHS maybe, released a stat that there's 15,000 known murderers minimum in our country now. And it's like, hey, if you have kids, do you feel good knowing that 15,000 more murderers are now walking around our streets? Because I sure don't. And that's a sign of that we've been overlooking something important. So like having a closed border in the sense of we actually vet the people that come through to make sure that people are coming through with good intentions. How is that not an obvious win-win, right? We get to allow immigrants to come into our country legally, and we get to protect the sovereignty of our country. That should be the obvious solution. And you see JD Vance kind of being like, why is this a difficult issue, you know? But it goes to show how far we've drifted from reality and reason and all these other virtues, because we're in a fourth turning and all of the shit is coming up to the surface to be seen. And, you know, it's been uncomfortable for the last 4 years, but I think you'd probably agree with me, Jeremy, that I'm very thankful for all of these systemic problems that have happened over the last 4 years since COVID, really, because they have woken our country up like nothing else ever has. And it's like, where would we even be if COVID never happened, if all these other things never happened? I can remember now, when I look back, how unawakened the world population was before COVID. Yeah. Of course, I didn't see it that way at the time, right? I wasn't looking at the world like, how awake are we? It wasn't even on my radar until COVID. So it's like gratitude for the blessings that the universe has given us. They don't always come in pretty packages with nice red bow ties, but everything that happens is God's will for humanity unfolding. And God is helping us see the issues we really need to heal as a country. And whether it's borders, money, all the issues we've talked about today, the good news for me is humanity is waking up to these things slowly but surely. And it is going to be, as you said, an interesting next decade to see if this is how awake we got in 3.5 years, what does 10 more years look like? It's interesting.
Yeah. Actually, I have nothing to add to that. That was a beautiful explanation, and I like how you tied in natural law and brought it full circle. I see exactly what you're saying, and that's I hope the audience can receive that in the way that you intended it.
Excellent. Well, let's get into some questions then, man.
Cool. All right, guys, we're gonna be diving into some of your Q&A questions, and as always, we source the questions from past episodes, so we would like to encourage you to participate. If you're gonna ask questions going forward, please indicate, like, if it's a question for me, please put Jeremy and then a dash and then ask the question. If it's a question for Aaron, please do the same. And then if you want both of us to speak on it, please indicate that. a lot of the questions as we had our team go through it are just like unspecified questions, or they're a bit vague. So we would also love to gently encourage you to actually maybe spend a little bit more time sitting with clarifying what your question actually is as you go to ask it, so that we can give as much value as possible when we're actually, responding to these things. Because going forward, we want to put more of an emphasis on building the community aspect and, being able to give direct value to you guys. So just wanted to mention that before we get into it, and we'll pull up some questions now. All right, guys. So we actually had 4 different questions that were in the same kind of ballpark and speaking to the same thing, even though that may not be immediately obvious on the surface. So we're going to I'm going to quickly run through them, and we're going to kind of address this with one macro answer on our end. So Kelly, it's like Kelly N. Man, sorry if I'm butchering it, asked, she said, awesome pod, love the new format and Q&A. Can you explain not voting? Thank you so much. And then we had Smiling Haratempe. This is a longer question, so I'm going to skip to the part that matters. I'm curious why neither of you vote. I myself believe that God is in control and his will play out in every way. So maybe voting is completely unnecessary because the plan is already written. Would love more detail about why you choose not to vote. So obviously me and Aaron have repeatedly mentioned, like, especially when we have people who are getting upset at us thinking that we're like some sort of Trump pundits or something. And we're like, look, we don't even vote. This is just about the planet. So I assume that's where these questions are coming from. We'll definitely address that in a moment. But we also had 2 other questions that are a little bit more in the sovereignty realm. For those of you who remember our rabbit hole series, we went into all sorts of cool stuff there. If you haven't checked that out, we'll drop the link in the description to our original rabbit hole series, which was the first time that me and Aaron were ever riffing together live.
And it was juicy, bro.
Yeah, it was juicy. That was, that one will go down in the record.
The good old
books
days.
Sure. The good old days, yeah. Anyway, we talked about all sorts of stuff over there. We touched on common law and trust law and a lot of these different things. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, you can check that out. But we had one question from Thaddeus Kalina that said, multiple times you mentioned you're not citizens of the United States. What are you then? Are you non-citizen nationals? Have you nationalized into other nations? Are you something else? I'm trying to wrap my head around the legal matrix and would love some specific info to see if what you say matches up with information I'm seeing elsewhere. And then the last one in this kind of macro category is from Pat, and she said, question, Aaron said you guys are non-citizens. Would one or both of you elaborate on that? What does that entail? How would one go about doing that? So, yeah, that's a lot. Do you want me to hand it off to you, or do you want me to go first?
If you're ready to go first, go for it. If not, I can take it.
All right. Well, a few things right off the top. So first thing, we had questions about voting. One of the kind of foundational understandings when you dive into studying law, specifically, like not legal law, but lawful law, so like common law and these types of things, contract law, is that you start to understand this core principles, one of which is how contracts actually work. And there are things like what are called implicit contracts and implied contracts and verbal contracts and nonverbal contracts and express contracts. And there's all these forms of contracts. And, most of us, if you're like me, we were taught that contracts are like, this piece of paper that you sign. But there's all sorts of other contracts that you're not currently probably privy to or aware of. And so an example of a contract is your driver's license. Another example of a contract is your birth certificate. Another example of a contract is you voting, basically, you being signed up for voting. There it is. That's a contract. It's a legal contract.
It's actually a bank note too.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just like, when you start to go into this stuff, like, me and Aaron started to many years ago, you start to realize like everything we've been taught is 180 degrees, upside down, just like Aaron teaches with the negative polarity and these types of things. It's like there's so many illusions and a lot of confusion going on. So I say all that to say, the questions are basically like, why don't you vote? And can you explain not voting? And does it not matter? So look, I'm not 100% dead set that like the entire voting system, like nothing is actually happening. I wouldn't like make that claim. Now that's certainly a possibility. I'm also not making the claim it's not possible. I'm just saying I'm not that far to that side, I would say, to where it's like not a single vote is counted. None of it actually matters. It's all a smokescreen. I don't know. I'm not naive to think that sense. So it's not that I guess I say that to say it's not on my end. I'm only speaking for myself. Aaron will speak for himself. The reason that I don't vote isn't because I think that like when you vote, it goes in the shredder and like literally nothing matters. I think that's like a little bit nihilistic. The reason that I don't vote is because if you vote, you're consenting to things that you currently are not aware of. And so that's why me and Aaron are always coming back to like self-governance and like on Aaron's whole riff about like we the people and stuff like this, like stop expecting handouts. The whole like energetics and spiritual metaphysical side of politics in general is just like, we did a whole episode on it called The Illusion of Authority. And it's just like, that's not inherent to us. We were taught that. We were taught to accept authority. We were born into it. You get, programmed that way. And so a piece of it is the authority aspect. A piece of it is that once you start getting into the sovereignty stuff, especially if you're going to actually like take action and shift the way that you're relating to the public and the private and some of these contracts and unwinding karma, basically, unwinding some of the threads that you have attached to things that you may strongly disagree with. And yet, if you're contracting, then in some way you're kind of supporting it energetically. And so it gets into this word of like acquiescing as well, right? And then there's also this this principle when you start learning the law side of things around privileges versus rights. And when you accept privileges, which how many of you have ever heard voting is a privilege? This is a privilege. We should take advantage of it. They're telling you right there. The problem with privileges when you start to study law is that they come with, there's a kind of a catch-22 to privileges. You're sacrificing things when you're accepting privileges. And so voting is an example of one of those privileges where you would want to ask yourself, by engaging or accepting or receiving this privilege, what am I giving up? And the answer to that question led me down a path that ultimately led me to rescind my voter registration and make changes in how I was relating to the public commercial system. So that's just a little bit on my end. Aaron, what would you like to say?
Very similar answer. It has a lot more to do with not wanting to be a U.S. citizen of why I don't vote than it does about not believing in the voting system. That's a big part of it too. But there's some nuance there, right? I have a lot of friends who are non-citizens like myself. In fact, almost all my friends are. It's like, I don't have any friends that are citizens, bro. But it's because we're all in this big law group together and we talk about common law every day and we're always learning from each other's processes and things. So like it's common knowledge in my friends group that the last thing you want to be is a US citizen, because under common law, and we talked about this at length in the Rabbit Hole series, so go watch those episodes if you want the full breakdown. But the word citizen is two Latin words, citi, city, which means municipal or governmental, and then zen means servant. So citizen literally means a government servant, a municipal servant. And so they created it through the 14th Amendment so that they could sort of entrap all American citizens into being their property because they have the title to you. This is the title to you as a living being, but only to your legal fiction, the all caps name that they print at birth and make a trust and all that, which we went into in the rabbit hole. So it's like they try to hedge everywhere in society so that you have to sign their contract to be their corporate servant, their property. Your driver's license, your social, your birth certificate, if you want to vote, anything noteworthy you want to do, they make you sign away your rights as, yes, I am a U.S. citizen, which means I am the property of the United States government, because the United States government today is a corporation, a business pretending to be a Republican form of government. And part of their business is enslaving the population to be their employees. So that's why you have to pay taxes if you're a U.S. citizen. Any court case you get involved in can basically go whatever way the judge wants it to go. They don't have to give you any real justice because you're showing up as this legal fiction U.S. citizen person property that they own, and you don't know that. You think you're showing up as a flesh and blood person, and the judge is seeing a legal fiction owned by the United States corporation. So he's like, oh, this is just chattel. I can do whatever I want with this person. All their rights are signed away. So when you wake up to this, it behooves you to not want to participate in it, obviously, because nobody wants to be a slave once you know you're a slave. But it's like I literally can't vote or I would be a citizen again. I'd have to register to vote and make myself a citizen again and then rescind all those contracts again. It's like I want to come out of the system and never re-enter the system. That's me personally. But when it comes to the voting conversation, Jeremy, I think you and I share similar views on this. Most of my friends are in the vein of like, voting is a total scam. It's never worth it to vote. It's always bad. Never vote for any reason. It's always a scam. And I don't think that that is leaving room for the nuance that is involved in this topic, because there's always nuance to everything. And so it's like, yes, I agree with the underlying premise that the negative polarity controls our government at this point in time. And so the every 4-year voting for a new president thing is definitely like a smoke screen they throw up to fool the public into thinking we really live in a free and fair, society. But as we know through history, both candidates have been kind of chosen by the deep state, and they're going to play their roles of left versus right, and they're going to run against each other. But secretly, they're both in bed with the same people and controlled by the same people. So that's what it means to say voting is an illusion. It means both candidates are controlled. And that's why Trump has gained so much surging popularity in America, is because whatever segment of America is aware of these facts we've just discussed sees Trump as the first genuine outsider who's gotten in, who's not a hand-selected deep state candidate. And in fact, he's like, I'm going to drain the swamp from these deep state candidates. And a lot of Americans were like, yeah, like we literally don't care about anything else about you other than the fact that you're an outsider. And that's been lost on the left, right, of why Trump has this popularity. And so in that way, like, I don't think that there isn't a scenario where voting may be a smart or wise idea for creating unity, because yes, the presidential position in our country has been, up until recently, completely controlled by the negative polarity. That's true, but times are changing, right? We're in this fourth turning. Things are moving. Populist candidates are gaining huge popularity. And so I could see a good argument for somebody, although I'm never going to vote because, to the questioner's point, I very much do see it the way that you explained, that everything is the will of God. God's will is unstoppable. It doesn't matter who gets into office. We even talked about this on our last episode, Jeremy. Like, it could be way better for humanity if Kamala Harris gets elected over Trump, and we have 4 more years of open borders, proxy wars everywhere, massive inflation, homelessness, drugs, health epidemic. Could be a very good thing, actually, because again, it forces people to wake up. And we're still just too asleep at this point. We need to be woken up. So I don't honestly give a crap who wins the presidency at all. It's like, it's in God's hands. But I could see somebody else having a good argument to say, we have a candidate, let's say like an RFK Jr., somebody who's just like undeniably virtuous, well-intentioned, wants to help humanity, not playing for the deep state, and maybe up against a very obvious deep state candidate like a Gavin Newsom or somebody. And I could see somebody saying, look, we need to occupy this powerful position of the presidency with somebody from the positive polarity. Because as long as it's a powerful position, somebody's going to control it. And if we don't get beings of light in these positions of power, of course the negative polarity is going to fill that vacuum with their people, right? This is what has been happening for a long time. So it's like we can kind of plug up the holes in the dam, so to speak, if we can get really good, well-intentioned people who are on the positive polarity into positions of power. So like I would understand if somebody said, I typically don't vote because I know it's all a sham, but in this election, I see a chance to get a truly spiritually evolved being in office, which could do a lot of good for humanity. I would say, hey, I got no problem with that argument. But for me, I'm not interested in voting. I don't want to be a citizen. And that's kind of where I live. But, we got to give people the freedom. Like, I don't want to go around telling everybody, come on, don't you know voting's a scam? Wake up, dude. Like, that's not an enlightened perspective either. So, I'm very open-ended about it. I don't have a problem with people who believe voting can work. I don't typically agree, but we got to give everybody their free choice.
Yeah, well said. We're all at different places, and as much as we all think we know, we also don't know shit. So,
right, like, dude, how many millions of Americans think that Trump is definitely the savior we're looking for? And it's like maybe not. We don't know. Like we won't know until probably decades from now when we look at the long-term implications of Trump's presidency or presidencies to know what the real downstream effects are. So it's like, hey, if you're convinced he is, then follow your heart. You know what I mean? We'll find out in the end.
Well said. All right, moving on to...
Or Kamala, for that matter.
Moving on to our next question. This is another question for both of us. It says, and this is just, their name is like user and then a million different letters and numbers. Greetings from India. Question for the next podcast. How do we achieve unity when we have people at different states of consciousness on the planet? A large part of humanity is right now unrefined, violent, selfish, and too low on the spectrum of consciousness you talk about. How is unity possible when the more refined, spiritually advanced people cannot connect with or live amongst the unrefined ones? Another way of saying it is, it's great to say we are all one, but the reality of this world is the spiritually refined ones have a difficult time living amongst people with grosser vibration. Interesting descriptor.
A very Indian way of saying that, actually.
Yeah. I was like, oh, interesting. I'm going to hand that one off to
really
you,
good
and
question.
then I'll give a few thoughts, but this is more your realm.
Yeah. Well, the answer is simple to me, user FG7UP601YW. It's a simple answer to me. It's what you're alluding to, I think, is the correct solution, which is we love everyone and we're all one, but because we're all one, we have to respect each other's free will, as we just said. Like it's not loving to go criticize all your friends who think voting is effective and be like, oh, you're so asleep, That's not loving. You're trying to be of service, yes, because you think you want to wake people up. But it's like honoring people's free will and honoring where people are is a big part of walking in the light. And that's uncomfortable for some people because you want to shake people by the shoulders and make them wake up. And it just doesn't work like that. So rather than trying to be about saving the whole world and running around trying to be everybody's savior, what we need to do is demonstrate the light as best we can, meaning those of us who are of refined vibrations, as you put it, should come together, build new systems, build the new earth, build new societies that are decentralized, protected, uncorrupted, all of that. If humanity doesn't see an example of what is possible, how can humanity strive towards unity? How can humanity strive towards healing? We need demonstrations, right? This is why there are ascended masters such as Jesus or Buddha who come to our planet to demonstrate what levels of consciousness are available. Because if you don't know, you have no idea what to aim for. So it's like, let's focus on giving the collective consciousness something to behold in terms of like, wow, those people over in Austin, Texas have really created an amazing little society for themselves. They grow their own food, they have their own hospitals, everyone's healthy, nobody's sick. You know, we can create little societies like that, which over time will grow into bigger societies. And I just think, Jeremy, we're going to get to a point where these sort of like dystopian nightmare zombie wastelands of our urban dense cities, where they're just filled with hundreds of thousands of poor, suffering drug addicts, crime through the roof, like nobody wants to live in these cities. That archetype of society, which we're at now, will eventually, like, we're going to keep getting more polarized as people leave the dense urban cities and want to create our own society in a rural area that's healthy, away from the dense urban cities. And you're going to get these two kind of coexisting societies where there will be new earth societies popping up that do things very different. You know, they probably will look more like the Amish than New York City, but maybe like the Amish infused with super epic technology, right? Living on the land, growing our food, but using AI and stuff like that.
AI Amish.
The AI Amish, I'm sure that that's going to happen, right? Because there's many, many good ways you can use these technologies. And once those two coexisting societies exist really to any degree, even if it's still weighted heavily towards the dense urban cities and crime, you're going to have two choices presented to humanity of this is two different ways of being. Here are two different formulas for existing here together. And more people will make the choice for the new earth. And gradually those societies will grow more large, more powerful economically and whatnot. And maybe it'll happen through states seceding or something. I don't know. But we're going to come to a point where people get so fed up with this curated 15-minute smart city type of approach that just condenses millions of people into little boxes like rats. And people are going to say, I don't want to live in these cities anymore. I want nothing to do with this. Chasing a corporate software engineering job is not more important to me than my quality of life is. And so they're going to look for an alternative. And when they see cities popping up everywhere with these amazing new earth societies, they're going to say, wow, that looks really nice. And the transition's going to happen. We're already seeing microcosms of this with like Californians leaving in droves for Texas, you know, leaving the blue states for the red states. It's very, very prominent. Happened in Florida starting around 2020 on with the pandemic. People were like, hey, my state, I can't even walk outside without getting arrested. Florida looks pretty nice. Everything's open. People are having fun. And so hundreds of thousands, I think millions of people in the last 3 years have moved to Florida. And the population of red states has gone up significantly, while the population of blue states has gone down quite significantly. And that's one example of, you see, the pattern's already happening. But it's between blue and red states, which is a very dumbed down version of how it will look eventually. Because lockdowns, pandemic, psyops, these things won't affect the new earth societies that are going to be totally decentralized and self-sufficient without really any ties to government. And so then what's going to happen, right? When you have, like, let's say they did a COVID pandemic type of psyop again, and you have multiple cities in America that are like, we're just not playing the game. Sorry, we're not part of the game. Have fun. And, you know, deaths happening everywhere, but then sort of like Denmark, right? Everyone's looking at Denmark like, hey, they have like no COVID deaths and they've kept everything open. What's going on with them? And it's like they let in less of the infiltration from big pharma and stuff into their country. So these problems didn't show up there like they did in America. We've already seen the signs of this happening, but it's going to get, I think, more pronounced as time goes forward. And I think that's the only real way is we got to let people be where they are. We shouldn't force our enlightenment on everybody, but we also have to be serious about creating something that's worth striving for and demonstrating to humanity. And that's how we honor free will, right? We make a much better alternative. We shine the light from the hilltops and we say, come all ye who want to be part of our land and enjoy the light we're enjoying. And people come from far and wide, right? We're not forcing anybody. We're not putting our business in anyone's face. And yet we're making a choice available to the world. To me, that's the only way that we get from where we are to the enlightened civilization. We just have to build the new world.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. I think you nailed it with your response, and it comes down to embodiment and meeting people where they're at and allowing that. I think unity sounds great, but that's more of what you could call a lofty goal, and a lot of times I think that can come from the ego itself, and just in a tricky way, where you're trying to shape the world in a certain way that would make you more comfortable, rather than just focusing on your own spiritual journey, loving others and meeting them where they're at. Because we're definitely not, as a planet, a lot of people aren't ready for unity. So like, you can't force that.
Yep. And furthermore, like, if we can't even create a truly unified small town,
Exactly.
why would we think we can create it on a
In the
planetary
world.
level?
Yeah.
Yeah. We got to start somewhere, right?
For sure. Yeah. All right.
Should I
So
grab the
those
next
are our me and Aaron questions. Now we're going to transition, and we're each going to answer 2 solo questions. All right. So first question for me is from Robin Malsassin. And it says, "Hey, Jeremy, wondering what your advice would be for someone who's at the eating shit and living with my mom stage."
I love the radical honesty.
For people without context, they're going to be like, wait, what? You're eating shit?
Why would you eat that?
Yeah. All the crypto and world events are super positive, but can induce FOMO for someone like me. FOMO is fear of missing out, for those who aren't aware. Would also appreciate Aaron's spiritual perspective, as I'm sure I'm in this position for a reason. So we're left to read between the lines a bit here. I'm going to assume that you're insinuating, because you're saying FOMO, that there's a lot of opportunity and you're not necessarily able to participate at the moment because you're in your eat shit stage, which is like your kind of like sacrifice stage, right? Like living below your means and paying your dues and building just making sacrifices to live a better life in the future, right? So that's obviously part of my story, and that's what he's referencing. That's something that I did when I was in my younger 20s to get ahead. So given all that, a few things I would say. So it's not easy when you're in that stage to see, whether it's like your friends or your peers or the world itself, like getting to experience these seemingly great things, and you're just like, oh, well, I'm over here, living with my mom, eating shit. And, for me, that was like, my friends were making like 75K or 65K or whatever. Not a lot of money, but way more than I was, coming right out of college, and they're going to Coachella and they're going to Europe and they're just doing all this traveling. And I'm like, paying off debt and living in a room with my mom. And so it's definitely not sexy and it doesn't feel great, right? But I used that uncomfortable feeling as motivation. And, it's just like most things in life. Like if you choose the short term, it's usually going to come at the cost of the long term. And if you choose the long term, it's usually going to come at the cost of the short term. So which life would you rather have? Choose, as they say, like choose your hard, right? Like if you make easy choices, you're going to have a hard life. But if you can discipline yourself to make the hard choices, you're going to have an easy life. And so I chose
that phrase.
Yeah, I chose the latter, and I really worked on embodying that in my 20s. And my 20s was a lot about discipline. So I don't know your age, it doesn't matter, but that's your season that you're in right now. So you're honing your discipline muscle, and part of that is just you're allowed to feel FOMO. You're human. Like accept it, honor it, but you don't need to act on it or excessively shame yourself or wish that you're in a different position, because your journey is dictated by your own karma and your own life purpose and all these things. And so it's kind of a pointless pursuit to envy others and that type of a thing. And then the last thing I'll say, just from a more practical standpoint, because you reference like crypto and world events and all these opportunities, is, and I think I've mentioned this in past episodes, but there's there's always a bull market somewhere. And what that means is that while, yes, this is a very important and exciting time to be an investor, especially in innovation, by no means that if you're currently not sitting on capital to invest and you're in a different season of your life, that, life is passing you by and you're missing a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like that's just some shit your ego would tell you. There will always be opportunities in the market. And so let's say you're, paying your dues for the next 3 years or whatever it may be. There's going to be all sorts of opportunities in 3 years. They might look different. It might be the next evolution of, or like whatever the new narratives are in crypto. Or, there's also boom and bust cycles. There's bear markets and there's bull markets. And, a few years from now, we'll be in another bear market in crypto. So let's say you're not able to invest until then. Great. You're going to have an excellent buying opportunities, and you have years to learn and study like I did before you're actually able to allocate capital. So I'm hoping I'm reading correctly in between the lines, and that's what you were asking and insinuating. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Aaron, from a spiritual perspective?
No, that's very much the context I got from the question as well. So I thought that was a fantastic answer.
Cool.
What if he told
I'll hand
you
it off to you for your first one?
What if he was like, I'm 73?
Well, I can see his little picture and he's got a nice head of hair. So
nice. Okay.
I would
He's probably
estimate
not.
he's in his 30s, maybe even low 30s. So
Like, dude, how's your mom even alive? What? Okay, so I'll go to my next question. This is from Alexandra's Avila. Hi, Aaron. Question: why is it that if the negative polarity mentions what they're doing in a deceiving way, that they curve karma? Wouldn't you get negative karma from deceiving others? Doesn't seem like a positive thing to do. Well, that's because it's not. You are correct. Deception is definitely never positive. So when they deceive people by all the ways they leak out and drip out their plans to the public through media, television, Hollywood, all these different methods they have, they always, we've said, kind of tell you what they're going to do. For example, there was Event 201, famously, right? I believe it was in April of 2019 or May of 2019. It was just a few months before the pandemic broke out, and it was this simulated event of a coronavirus outbreak. I mean, they literally did not hide it at all. It was like step by step, word for word, exactly what they ended up doing for the actual pandemic. They had this whole fake news segment where they're like showing a death ticker at the bottom of the screen. I mean, it's crazy to watch Event 201 on video because you're like, oh my gosh, like these people told us every single detail of what they were going to do up until even the vaccine rollout and how there was conspiracy theorists spreading misinformation online against the vaccine. That was part of Event 201. Like, it's pretty wild how much they went out of their way to tell us what they were about to do. And to me, that says the bigger the psyop, the bigger the tell has to be karmically. Meaning if they're going to really, really infringe on free will like they did during the pandemic, they've got to really, really basically tell you they're about to do it. And so they do it in clever ways of like getting you to acquiesce of your own free will, to give away your rights and things, to be virtuous, to be noble for whatever reason. So although they're tricking you by giving you a false premise or something, or touting virtues they don't actually plan on implementing, things like that, it doesn't really matter what they say as long as they get your agreement, your tacit or explicit agreement. They have alleviated a significant amount of the karma. And what the Law of One says about this, interestingly, is that the negative polarity has just as much access to the Law of One and all of its power as the positive polarity does. They have to go about acquiring it in a different way, of course, by infringing on free will. but they get the same amount of power. So it's like everything we can do in the light, they can do as well, but it's a bit more challenging for them to do it because there needs to be a lot of coordination, a lot of deception, a lot of game planning. The negative polarity plans in advance like their life depends on it. They're the masters of planning things in advance to always stay one or two moves ahead of the public awareness. So they don't actually curve their karma completely. They can only ameliorate it to a certain extent. And again, we saw this from COVID, right? Yes, they got to do what they wanted to do, which was inflict this psyop on humanity so they could make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars from the big pharma industry. And they did that very successfully. But it came at a cost, didn't it? They didn't get out of that one scot-free. They paid a big price in terms of the collective awakening. There is so much more awareness around the medical industry corruption, government corruption, systemic world corruption, the corruption of three-letter agencies like the WHO and the CDC. They woke up the world like, we've used the example of a sleeping giant before. Like the population is like a sleeping giant. And the tyrants who control the government and the institutions are like these little dwarves running around trying to stay quiet enough that they don't wake the sleeping giant. And they're, painting mustaches on the sleeping giant and screwing with the sleeping giant while he's asleep. And they're trying to stay quiet. But while they're picking the pocket of the giant, someone, bumps the giant, wakes the giant up. That's basically what happened during COVID, right? Except it was more like somebody stood over the giant with two clash cymbals and just banged them together in his eardrums. They woke the world up in an alarming way from COVID. So did they escape all the karma? Absolutely not. They got walloped by the karma. And yet, the way karma works is it doesn't always come all at once. Usually it takes time to catch up to you, right? And we're seeing the reverberations of the negative karma they generated by violating so many people's free will. And the effects are still coming downstream. We're still awakening from it. So it's like they got a bit of a win because they got to pull off their Ponzi scheme through the pharma industry. But we got a win too because we got to wake up and the world is now much more aware of these things. So let's be careful never to give the negative polarity more power than we have in our minds of like, oh, they're so powerful. They're so coordinated. They're everywhere. All their plans work. We got to be careful of those mindsets because they're easy to fall into, those fearful mindsets or victim mindsets, but they're just absolutely not true. They seem to be relatively true at times, like during COVID. I fell into that a little bit too. A little bit of fear came up of like, man, these people can do whatever they want. But that's because I was just waking up to the reality of the world we live in. I'd never been aware of these things until then. And so as time has gone forward, my opinions of how much control the negative polarity really has have drastically changed. And as you guys know, I'm extremely optimistic about where we're at and where we're heading. But these things are going to continue to happen. They're going to keep doing these kinds of psyops. And really, I think, Jeremy, the important part here is that the more of us don't participate, the more of us who are simply aware of what they're doing, it's end of game for them. When there's too much collective awareness of what they're doing and too much non-compliance, even the 30, 40, 50% of the population that gives into the psyops isn't enough to offset the 30, 40, 50% of people that are like, no way, dude, you ain't taking my rights. I don't consent. And that energy of like, no, I don't consent, even if it comes from anger, even if it comes from fear, is very important for our collective because it means you don't have my free will, negative polarity. I do not consent. And so that's that much less power that they're being given and that much more karma has to come down upon them. Everybody they violate who's aware of what they're doing and says no, and they still violate you, that's a big karmic payment, right? And we talked about that on the last episode, Jeremy, of they're getting to this point where the majority of people are waking up and not giving in to all these different plans that they have. So what do they do when they're at this point where most people are awake and not participating, but all their plans depend on most people participating? I think what they do is they say, screw it, just do it anyways, force them to take the jab or whatever. And it's like we kind of want to push them to that point, the negative polarity, I mean, because that's how we get karma back on our side, right? It's been on their side for a long time because we've been blind and ignorant and way too compliant and hateful and angry. But now the pendulum has swung far in the other direction, and they're getting more desperate, which is a very good thing for the positive polarity.
Well said. For my second question, let's see what we got. All right, we got a question from Oscar Rodriguez that says, what do you guys think about XRP crypto? XRP will replace fiat currency? ? So this is always a fun topic.
Yeah.
Trigger warning. Personally, I think that I'll say it like this. What I believe XRP is a solid crypto project with real world utility. I believe that it is, well, I know that it is one of the ISO 20022 coins. And so that means that it is going to have a lot of real world banking implications. That will be ISO 20022 will be debatably, supposedly, the new SWIFT banking system. So whereas now, we've talked about this before, like if you want to wire money from someone or to someone, they might not get it for 2 to 3 business days. If you wire it on a Friday, they might not get it until Wednesday. That's ridiculous, right? Whereas crypto is like, depending which type of crypto arrives in anywhere from 30 seconds to 30 minutes at the slowest. So XRP is really working on solving that problem amongst a number of other problems. So I want to start with that to clarify that like there is legitimate utility, and they also are a much older project. They've been around for a long time and they've survived multiple bear markets and bull markets, and that's important. They've survived the lawsuit. They have a massive community, and they're one of the top 10 market cap coins. So I say all that to say those are the pros. Now, my concerns with the XRP, with XRP as an investment and the XRP community is that for some reason, out of all the coins, it is the most dogmatic. And it is like very much so a religion. And if you are balanced and have perspectives like sometimes I share, that can be for some reason upsetting for people, where it's like, yeah, it's a pretty solid investment depending on a variety of factors that I would use to analyze any investment, right? I would look at the macro climate. I would look at the investment's fundamentals. I would look at the technical analysis and the price action on the charts. I would do all of the normal due diligence, and that would inform whether or not I would want to enter or build a position. And just based off of that regular due diligence, I have chosen to, in 2020, XRP was one of my biggest positions. I sold it all and I haven't bought back in. It's not because I think it's going to zero. I can almost guarantee you it's not going to zero. It's a more mature project, and I think that, long term, it should be around. But that's not the same thing that the XRP people want to talk about. They want to talk about how exactly what my man said, that it's going to replace the fiat currency. And here's the thing. If I pull up the market cap of XRP right now,
Wow.
All right, 30 billion. So the XRP community wants to talk about this doing like 100x. So that would take us to 3 trillion. I've talked about this before, Aaron. The entire market cap of all of crypto is just over 2 trillion.
Oh, that's
so like
right.
people just aren't mathing. Like once again, if you 10x this, you're at 300 billion. If you 100x this, you're at 3 trillion. the entire market cap of all of crypto, thousands and thousands and thousands of projects, including Bitcoin, which is a behemoth, you're at right now 2.2 trillion. So do you see the problem with that like investment thesis? It's relying on something insanely improbable to happen. So like looking at this chart, it's like I really hated the chart before, but actually it has built some semblance of legs. This is a nice base, and I don't, especially if we look at it like, well, the last year's not the best. Let's see.
Dude, look at that spike in 2018. That thing is gnarly.
Here or here?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
That's a crazy candle, dude.
Yeah, so that would be a 6x from where we're at right here. And I think that's absolutely will be revisited and surpassed. So that's the thing, is like I'm just being like realistic. Rule number one in investing is that you always want to come up with a degree of probability. So like you want to come up with what's called a base case, a bear case, and a bull case, right? So like that means like a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and then like more of like this is probably most probable, which is in the middle of them. And so you want to kind of look at it like that. And any investment or like even like asset class or whatever in which I noticed that the community members don't practice any of this normal investor hygiene, it's like a big red flag for me, and I usually don't want to get involved with it. And so that's kind of the case with like the XRP stuff. Like for example, a lot of them you'll find that they don't even invest in other coins, or if they do, they only invest in the ISO 20022 thing. And I just said that like rule number one is to have a base case, a bear case, and a bull case. Well, what if what you're betting on doesn't play out? They don't have an answer for that other than you don't see the vision. You don't get it. And it's like, I mean, study history. Like we have a plethora of examples of financial catastrophes happening. And do you think that the people that were fully levered with hundreds of billions of dollars and their multiple decade career of success, that were fully levered at the top and lost everything, banks going under, et cetera, to me, it's kind of like approaching investing from that light. Like they obviously did not see what was coming. And I draw that analogy because it's like you always want to try to mitigate risk. And so when you're investing, that means that you want to anticipate, what if this doesn't potentially pan out how I wish it would. And what that means in a practical sense is XRP solid investment? Yeah, chart looks pretty good. Solid community, has real utility. I've talked about the liquidity cycle a lot. When that goes up, what do you think, what do you think is going to happen? Of course. But is it like the best crypto? No. Is it my favorite project? Absolutely not. And once again, it's a top 10. So that means that it's limited in terms of upside compared to finding more potentially undervalued projects. And that's about all I'll share on that. And I know that'll be upsetting, but like I said, at the right price, I'll happily be an XRP holder. I have nothing against XRP, and I used to be an XRP holder. It's just that some of my friends are, treating it like
they're in the cult,
like
bro.
Mormonism.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it reminds me of what's that Scientology documentary? I think Going Clear. Might be another one.
About.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The part where like the one Scientology member is questioning some of either their doctrines or like how they go about doing things, and like this seems off, and they're questioning one of their superiors, and they're like, "You're just not trusting. You're just not trusting."
Yeah.
And like the mental gymnastics they go through to hold on to the ideology, definitely translates to a lot of crypto communities in a similar way. There's a lot of that kind of collective delusion of, hey, we're all in so deep at this point, and like the tides have really turned, and it's not like this project isn't what we thought it was going to be 5 years ago, but we're in too deep, we're too invested. So like, let's just keep this thing rolling and hope for the best. And so you get these ideologies of like, well, you just don't understand the project, Jeremy. And really it's coming from more of like an insecurity people have of like, did I invest in the wrong coin? Because there's so many.
Yeah.
And there's so many great projects that how could you not have those concerns if you're heavily invested in anything? There's new coins popping up every day, gaining steam and stuff. So the crypto world I've noticed is like loaded with culty vibes in the different coins. Yeah. And it's just something you're going to encounter if you're in the crypto space.
Yep. Yeah. And it's something I've observed in myself, and I understand like why it happens, but it's just something that I think should be disciplined. Like an investment should not be a religion. And I've personally taken huge L's because I got too dogmatic about the thing became larger than just an investment, right? It became like a community, a movement, and a belief system. You're completely delusional at that point. So no one's going to be telling you anything about it, right? You think everyone else is wrong. And so these are just things you learn through experience. But yeah, I don't have a dog in the fight. Like I hope it 10X's, I hope it 100X's. I just think other things will go up more, and I have more conviction in them. So that's what I invest in.
Cool. Well, then I'll finish us off with the last question that came in. This is from J.D. Chandler says, in many Christian communities, I've noticed how Luke 12, where Jesus speaks of bringing division rather than peace, is often used to justify conflicts and division, particularly within families and spiritual groups. Yes, it is, my friend. It seems that this scripture can sometimes serve as a self-fulfilling prophecy leading to demonization and exclusion rather than unity and love. From your perspective, how can those of us who follow Christ's teachings and the law of one navigate this division, especially when others accuse us of being demonic or antichrist because we interpret a question aspects of Christian doctrine differently? How do we stay true to the fruits of the Spirit in these situations? So this is something I bump into all the time, JD. Angry Christians that are upset that I'm questioning their doctrines and whatnot. Not too dissimilar from XRP fanatics. And this is just part of human nature, right? You got to defend your belief system if you're identified with it. But this is very true that certain scriptures, and especially Luke 12:51, where Jesus says, I have not come to bring peace but a sword. There's some scholarly speculation that is a later interpolation from the Roman Catholic Church that was trying to using Christianity as a banner of war. And it's really hard to recruit armies under any of Jesus's teachings because they're all about pacifism and nonviolence and loving your neighbor, loving your enemies. So it's like you can't really make a war slogan out of anything Jesus said. And yet it's the religion of Jesus we're pretending like we are. So we need a verse in the mouth of Jesus where we can justify war. And Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. In, is it Matthew and Luke have it differently? One, I think in Matthew it's a sword. In Luke, it's division. I've come to bring division rather than peace. And I think if that is a genuine passage from Jesus, there's only one way to interpret it. And that is in the same light of the other passage from Jesus talking about if you're not willing to forsake mother and father and house and land and property for the sake of the kingdom, then you're not worthy of it. And people also misinterpret that verse to say, a good Christian should give the middle finger to their parents and their property and give it all away. It's like, obviously that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus didn't mean you have to actually hate your father and mother to follow him. He means if anything comes in the way of the gospel of the kingdom, if your love for the gospel is not hatred by comparison to something else, then you're not worthy of it because it will demand everything of you. He even said to his disciples, most of you here are going to have to give your life for this teaching, for this gospel message in a brutally violent way. He told his disciples this, you guys are going to die violent deaths because of me and my teachings. So what Jesus is saying is you have to be all in for this. In a similar way, in this passage, again, if this is a genuine saying of Jesus, then what Jesus is clearly saying is that the message I am bringing, although it's a message of the love of God, the goodness of God, the unity of creation, although that's my message, it's going to bring division because the Orthodox Jews of the day don't believe that and don't agree with that. And so they're going to resist it. So it's like wherever Jesus went, there was controversy and division because his teachings were controversial for his day, and they still are. So obviously, many Christians use verses like this to justify war and stuff, as if you could use any verse of Jesus to justify war is hilarious to me. But I think the bigger point people miss on this verse is like, if you're really, really living the truth, you're going to trigger people. You're going to offend people. You're going to cause division in a lot of places you go because the ego is threatened by truth. So if you're a living example of divine truth, you better believe you're going to threaten people's egos, and a lot of people aren't going to like you for that. That's part of what it means to walk in the light, is that you're not going to earn everybody's favor. Not everybody's going to like you and agree with you, especially not, religious people and ideologues. So it's kind of like a admonition from Jesus, the way I see it, of what to prepare for. Like, just be aware of the fact that when I bring this message, it brings a lot of division, where it should bring peace, right? But humanity is not at the place yet where it can really receive Jesus's message in that unifying way. So as far as like, what do we do when Christians accuse us of being demonic or antichrist? You just love them and bless them and forgive them and don't make a big deal about it. That's where they are, right? It doesn't have to be where you are. You can be above that. You can transcend that level of consciousness, of name calling and all of that. But if you get offended and defensive and triggered by these kinds of things, then you are lowering yourself to that level. So for me, it's always, how can I be as uninvolved as possible from the ego shenanigans and yet be as involved as possible from a space of love and service to others? That's the nuance that we have to figure out, each and every one of us.
That was deep.
I love going deep, bro. You know me.
Definitely your wheelhouse on that one. So we'll wrap today's episode up here, and we'll see you in November, which is going to be an extra spicy extra spicy month for the show. Maybe we'll have to plan our episodes kind of around that, because it's going to be a crazy week or two with the election, which is, what's the actual day of it?
It's either the 5th or the 6th.
Okay, so we're 2 weeks out almost.
Yeah, I think we're less than 2
days. 2 weeks out. Wow. Yeah.
As the time of this filming, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll have to, maybe we'll do our next one like right after it or something like that. And
yeah, we'll have to game plan it. It's going to be nuts.
Yeah, we'll have to game plan it. But all right, guys. Well, we appreciate you. Let us know if you liked this format. We're just playing around with different formats so we don't get too stagnant in the every 2 weeks have to do things a certain way. Me and Aaron want to continue to enjoy the show, and there's a variety of ways in which we can provide value rather than just always doing the same predetermined format. So we're just switching things up.
We love the questions.
We'll continue to, and let us know what you thought of the episode. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Peace and love.